Welcome back and thanks for tuning in. When I first started the channel, this is the kind of project I really wanted to work on the most, and that is something that I either need or something that fixes a problem. In this particular case, it does both. You see that little bit of wiggle there? Not a big issue when I am cutting something blocky, because I have the firm anchor at the one end. But if I'm cutting something that's relatively thin and long, I find there's a bit of deflection. As the saw blade begins to cut into the far end, it pushes it aside just a little bit. It's almost to the point where you can measure it, but definitely if you cut a couple of consecutive pieces and then hold them together, you can feel it. Now, not a big issue really if I had either a jointer or a planer, but I have neither of those. And I have a project coming up that I want to make a whole pile of strips. I want to make a butcher block countertop, and having all those little bits of slight difference is going to result in me having to do an awful lot of sanding. So I want to get this as accurate as possible and, well, basically save myself an awful lot of work in the end. So I didn't want this to be tight fit because it has to move back and forth, but I want it to be relatively close, so when I clamp it in place, I'm not having errors creep in because of having this. See how tight this is here? If the other end was relatively loose, when I clamp the other one down, it may cause it to move a little bit and make it more difficult to set up. So this is just the offcut from the board I cut for the length, and I cut another one here. This is, like I said, very straightforward. Those are going to be the uprights. All I need to do now is trim them to the height of the saw sled. Not really necessary, but it makes it much more simple on the hand and comfortable and easier to clamp up. So I'm going to do that, and then it's just a simple matter now of screwing these together. I'm not doing anything really fancy here. It's pretty much exactly what you see there, except it's going to be long enough that, of course, that it can go to both ends. And that's it. That's the project. I'm going to, after I screw this together, I'm going to run a few test pieces, because it takes a little bit of time to get it as accurate as I want it to. But once, of course, it's set up and everything's clamped in place, I can very, very quickly run through as many pieces as I want. And of course, a butcher block style countertop is going to require an awful lot of pieces. And I've been doing some number crunching for the last little while, trying to figure out what's the best material, how many pieces I'm going to need to cut, and all that sort of stuff. And I want to make sure I don't waste too much material, because wood's very expensive, which is something that doesn't seem to be ending anytime soon. So there you go. That's the project. That's as simple as it's going to be. No finishing, no sanding, no nothing. It just needs to fit in and work. So I'm going to drop it in place, and I'm going to spend probably a lot longer than seems necessary to set this up. You see, it fits nicely. There's a bit of gap on both ends, but not enough. What I'm going to do here is I'm just going to pick a random number. In hindsight, what I should have done was set this up for the piece I want to trim and show you, but I wasn't thinking far enough ahead, and I just set it up so that, I can test it out. The mallet tap wasn't actually really necessary. I find there's, like I said, because this is wood that has not been sanded or planed or anything to fit it up, there's a slight amount of difference between the two ends. But once I put a tiny, tiny amount of pressure on the far end with my thumb, it's easy to set up. So I set it for 2 inches. Then I'm going to go down to the other end, do the same, show you the same thing. Haven't touched anything, and it's also 2 inches. Again, not really that. It's not an acid test, right? What I need to do here is trim a few pieces, and then, of course, see what I end up with. I mean, I want to make sure that I can put them together and relatively roughly run my hand over them and not see any or feel any difference. That's the key. So these are my rough starter pieces for the butcher block setup. So they're designed so that where I need to cut and everything else, like I said, I don't waste a whole lot of material. I think in the real one that I'm going to be cutting out for the actual butcher block is going to be a bit thicker because, again, I don't want to waste any material, and this would waste about, if I remember correctly, just under a ½ inch, somewhere around the 3/8 mark of each piece I'm using, and that's not acceptable. So I'm going to run this through here, and then I realized those are the pieces that I'd cut using the old saw sled stop, and I had measured the deflected end. Sorry, no, the other way around. I measured the part that wasn't deflected, so it didn't quite trim off to square. So that actually proves this as a proof of concept. So I'm going to trim this one more time, and then I'm going to run through a couple more, and then we're going to have a look at them here. This is silly. I mean, using a micrometer on this sort of thing is overkill and really not important. What I really need to do, of course, is just put them side by side and make sure that I can't really feel any difference in them. And that's the important bit, and it's what's coming up next. So you can just ignore this. It's fine. It works. But here we go. This is the one that matters, and that is just taking the pieces, giving them a bit of a tap, get them in place, and then hold them up for you to have a look at. And I'm very happy with that. You can feel a little bit of a gap, and that gap you see there is just because the board isn't quite straight. I only did the one direction. In reality, when I do this thing, it'll be both directions we cut, and most of that will be gone as well. But that doesn't really matter because each of these pieces is going to be glued and screwed together, and this dimension will be nice and tight. This is all designed so that the top end will be as smooth as possible and therefore cut down on the amount of sanding and finishing I need to do. So please tune back in at a future date, and we'll see if this all actually managed to work out well. It's something I plan on doing relatively soon, so we'll see if this actually ends up working. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video, and bye for now.